Never save money. This bold advice came from my grandfather as part of a grandfather's life lesson, and this is why I share it today. This is a motivational story about work and wisdom that reminds us that while we often search for a life golden compass, the truth? It usually lies in our actions rather than our intentions. In a small farming town in Nebraska, there lived an old man named George, whom everyone called lazy. He did not work. He spent his days sitting on an old porch swing under the shade of a large maple tree, looking out toward the horizon. He talked a lot about plans he never started. "One day I'll open a hardware store," he'd say. "One day I'll buy acreage and some cattle. I'll make a fortune without ever getting tired." This was far from a success story. It was a life stuck in neutral. That day never came. People stopped laughing at him. They only looked at him with pity. His wife, Mary, would sigh and say, "George, life doesn't run on dreams. Life runs on work." He would just lift his shoulders slightly and reply, "Someday, Mary, I'll find a way." Years passed, and life became harder. One night, his grandson, Leo, barefoot and thin, asked softly, "Grandpa, is there any bread?" Mary opened the pantry, but it was empty. George looked at the floor, his throat feeling tight. Dreams could not be eaten. Ideas could not fill a stomach. In this moment, George began to see the shocking cost of his own choices. That night, George did not sleep. The next morning, with shame in his heart, he went to work in the local cornfields as a day laborer. The work was cruel. The sun burned his skin. His back bent lower with each passing day. His hands became sore and painful. Sweat ran into his eyes. In the middle of the field, he whispered, "This feels like a chain." At night, he came home tired and silent. Mary served him beans and a single biscuit, never more. Leo hugged him and asked, "What did they give you today, Grandpa?" George looked at his meager pay and said, "It's not much, but it's something." But the money did not stay. The utility bills took it. The pharmacy took it. The grocery store took it. Only a few coins were ever left on the kitchen table. Week after week, the pay came and went. The roof still leaked, and the hunger stayed. One afternoon, at the local general store, George heard some men talking loudly. "The secret is saving," one said. "If you save, you're safe." Those words stayed in his head. That night, he found a large glass mason jar and hid it under the bed. Each week, after buying only what was needed, he dropped a few coins inside. The sound of the clink made him smile. It felt like hope, a flickering story light in a dark room. One day, Leo found the jar. "What is this, Grandpa?" George said proudly, "Ah, that's for tomorrow, Leo." But saving was hard. George did not buy new work boots even when his old ones fell apart. Food became less and less. They ate slowly, and the dinner plates were never full. One day, Mary could not stay quiet. "What good is saving if we're going hungry right now?" George did not look up. "Someday you will understand," he replied. Months passed, and the mason jar filled up. To George, it looked like safety. One morning, they went to the market. He placed the money on the table and said, "I want 3 sacks of corn." The seller counted the money and shook his head. "Prices went up, George. This buys 1 sack and a half." George froze. Money loses its value, the seller said simply. On the walk home, the jar felt heavy. That night, George poured the money out and counted it again and again. It never grew. Leo asked quietly, "So what is the use of saving, Grandpa?" George had no answer. It was a moment where he realized that perhaps everything happens for a reason, and his struggle was leading him to a deeper voice of wisdom. Days became dark. He grew weaker. Food was not enough. One morning, sitting on the porch, he saw neighbors pass by. One was carrying a carton of fresh eggs. Another carried bottles of milk. They walked calmly and did not look afraid. Then he remembered Leo's words from long ago. "What if we buy chickens?" This time, George listened. He realized he had to learn how to trust the process. He took the last of the money from the jar and bought a few scrawny chickens. When he let them loose in the yard, Leo laughed and ran after them. "Now we have an egg factory," Leo shouted. At first, they only found 1 or 2 eggs a day. They ate some and they sold some. With that money, they bought another chicken. George began to write everything down in a small notebook. Each egg mattered. This was his true story of growth. Soon the yard was full of noise. Neighbors started coming over specifically to buy fresh eggs. For the first time, the work felt good. One afternoon, George held up an egg and said to Leo, "This is worth more than a jar of money. It feeds us, it grows, and it doesn't lose its value." Leo hugged him and asked, "So you aren't lazy anymore, Grandpa?" George smiled with misty eyes. "No, my child, I finally learned the lesson." The mason jar stayed forgotten and empty under the bed. When people talked about saving money, George would point to the chickens and say, "Saving money is like trying to hold water in your hands. It always slips away. You have to make it work for you, even if you start small." And that is how the man once called lazy learned the greatest truth of his life. Never save money. Make it grow. This is the voice of wisdom I leave with you today, a story that shines a story light on the path to true abundance. This has been a chapter from the Wordy Tales, reminding you that your future is not in what you keep, but in what you plant.